there's a question I want to start with, and I don't want you to answer it out loud. I just want you to feel it. Have you ever helped someone and regretted it? Not immediately. Not in the moment. Because in the moment it feels right, it feels human. It feels like the kind of thing good people do. You show up. You give your time, your energy, your attention. Sometimes your money. Sometimes your sleep. Sometimes your peace. And in that moment, there's a quiet voice inside you that says, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. But then something happens. Maybe they don't appreciate it. Maybe they take more than you expected. Maybe they disappear the moment they no longer need you. Or worse, maybe they come back again and again, not because they value you, but because they've learned they can use you. And slowly, quietly, something starts to shift inside you. You begin to feel tired, not physically tired, soul tired. You begin to feel resentment, and you hate that feeling because it doesn't match the person you believe yourself to be. You start asking yourself questions you never thought you'd ask. Why do I always end up here? Why do people take advantage of me? Is being kind just a weakness? And that's the moment most people get it wrong. Because they think the problem is helping. They think the solution is to stop giving, to harden up, to build walls, to say no to everyone, just to protect themselves. But that's not the truth. The truth is helping others does have a cost, a shocking cost. Not because helping is wrong, but because helping without awareness, without boundaries, without purposing, will cost you more than you ever intended to give. You see, we've been told a story our whole lives. A simple story. A beautiful story, that good people help others. That kindness is always rewarded. That if you give, it will come back to you. And while there's truth in that, it's incomplete. Because nobody told us what happens when it doesn't come back. Nobody told us what happens when your kindness becomes someone else's convenience. Nobody told us that sometimes the more you give, the less you are valued. And that's where the real lesson begins. Because helping others is not just an action, it's a responsibility. And like any responsibility, if you don't handle it with intention, it will overwhelm you. Let me tell you something uncomfortable. Not everyone you help wants to grow. Some people don't want a hand up. They want a handout. And there's a difference. A hand up requires effort. It requires change. It requires them to step into discomfort and take ownership of their life. A handout requires nothing. And if you keep giving handouts to people who refuse to grow, you don't help them. You trap them. And worse, you trap yourself. Because now you're not helping out of purpose. You're helping out of obligation. Out of guilt, out of fear that if you stop, you'll be seen as selfish. And that's where the cost becomes real. The cost is not your time. The cost is not your energy. The cost is your identity, because slowly you stop helping because you choose to. And start helping because you feel like you have to. And there's no faster way to burn out a good heart than to make it feel like it has no choice. I've seen people lose themselves this way. People who started with pure intentions. People who genuinely wanted to make a difference. But over time, they became exhausted, frustrated, disconnected, and eventually they stopped helping altogether. Not because they didn't care anymore, because they cared too much for too long without protecting themselves. And here's the irony. The world doesn't need less people who care. The world needs people who care sustainably. People who understand that helping others is not about sacrificing yourself completely. It's about showing up in a way that allows you to keep showing up. Because if helping others destroys you, who's left to help? Think about that. If every generous person burns out, if every kind person becomes bitter, if every helper decides, I'm done, then what kind of world are we left with? So the question is not whether we should help. The question is how do we help without losing ourselves? How do we give without being taken advantage of? How do we stay kind in a world that doesn't always reward kindness? And the answer begins with something most people are uncomfortable with. Boundaries, not walls. Boundaries. Walls say, no one gets in. Boundaries say, the right people can come in, but not at the cost of who I am. And that's a very different mindset, because helping without boundaries is not kindness. It's self-neglect, and self-neglect always comes with a price. You see, when you don't set boundaries, you teach people how to treat you. You teach them that your time is always available, that your energy is always accessible, that your yes is guaranteed. And once people learn that, they adjust accordingly, not because they're bad people, but because humans naturally move toward what is easy. And if you make yourself endlessly available, you make yourself easy to use. That's the truth. And I know that's hard to hear, because many of us were raised to believe that saying no is wrong. That putting yourself first is selfish. That good people sacrifice no matter what. But here's the reality. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Not because it sounds nicey, but because it's physically, emotionally, and psychologically impossible. And yet, so many people try. They keep giving. Keep showing up, keep saying yes. Long after they have nothing left to give. And then they wonder why they feel broken. why they feel invisible, why they feel like no one truly cares about them. But the truth is it starts with you, because if you don't value your own time, why should anyone else? If you don't protect your own energy, why would anyone respect it? If you don't recognize your own limits, how can you expect others to honor them? Helping others should come from strength, not from depletion. It should come from clarity, not from confusion. It should come from choice, not from pressure. And that requires something even deeper than boundaries. It requires self-awareness. You have to know why you help. Is it because you genuinely want to make a difference? Or is it because you're afraid of disappointing people? Is it because it aligns with your values? Or because you've built your identity around being the one who always shows up? Because those are not the same thing. One is healthy, the other is dangerous. Because when your identity is tied to being needed, you will unconsciously seek out situations where people need you, even if those situations are unhealthy, even if those relationships are one-sided, even if those people never change. And that's where the cycle repeats. You help, they take, you feel drained, but you help again, because that's who you believe you are. And breaking that cycle requires courage. The courage to say, I care about you, but I also care about myself. The courage to say, I'm willing to help, but not at the cost of my well-being. The courage to walk away when helping becomes harming. And yes, that's the shocking part. Sometimes helping others can actually harm them. Because if you remove every obstacle from someone's path, they never learn to walk on their own. If you solve every problem for someone, they never develop the ability to solve problems themselves. If you constantly rescue someone, they never learn responsibility. And that's not kindness, that's dependency. Real help empowers. It doesn't enable. It challenges. It doesn't carry. It supports growth, not comfort. And growth is uncomfortable, which means real helping is uncomfortable. For you and for them. It means sometimes saying no. It means sometimes stepping back. It means sometimes letting people struggle, so they can become stronger. And that's not easy, because it goes against everything we feel in the moment. In the moment, we want to fix things. We want to take away pain. We want to make everything okay. But long-term impact requires short-term discomfort. And that's a trade most people are not willing to make. So they choose the easy help, the immediate relief, the quick fix. And in doing so, they pay the price later. In burnout, in frustration, in relationships that feel one-sided, in a life that feels heavy instead of meaningful. But it doesn't have to be that way, because when you learn to help with intention, everything changes. You become more selective, more thoughtful, more impactful. You stop asking, can I help? And start asking, is this the right way to help? You stop giving everything and start giving what actually makes a difference. And ironically, you end up helping more, not because you do more, but because what you do matters more. And here's what's beautiful about that. When you help from a place of strength, people feel it. When you help with boundaries, people respect it. When you help with clarity, people grow from it. And the right people, the people who truly value you, they won't walk away when you say no. They'll understand. They'll appreciate you even more. Because they don't just want what you can give. They value who you are. And that's the difference. Helping should not cost you your peace. It should not cost you your identity. It should not cost you your self-respect. Yes, it requires effort. Yes, it requires sacrifice. But not self-destruction. Never that. So the next time you feel that pull, that instinct to step in to give to help, pause for a moment, not to stop yourself, but to check yourself. Ask ye, am I helping from strength or from pressure? Am I helping in a way that empowers or enables? Am I helping at a cost I can afford or one that will break me later? Because the goal is not to stop helping. The goal is to help wisely, to help sustainably, to help in a way that allows you to keep being the kind of person the world needs. Because the world does need people like you. People who care, people who show up, people who are willing to give. But it needs you whole, not exhausted, not resentful, not lost, whole. And that's the real challenge. Not becoming someone who stops caring, but becoming someone who cares without losing themselves in the process. Because when you figure that out, when you learn to balance generosity with self-respect, keenness with boundaries, giving with awareness, you don't just change your life. You change the way others experience help. You raise the standard. You show people that real help is not about dependency. It's about growth. And that's when helping becomes powerful again. Not costly in a way that breaks you, but meaningful in a way that builds something bigger than both of you. And that is a cost worth paying. And this is where something even deeper begins to reveal itself. Self-mastery is louder than self-promotion. The strongest message you can send to the world is not what you say, but who you become. Because at the end of the day, people don't just listen to your words, they respond to your patterns. They respond to your consistency. They respond to the way you show up over and over again, especially when it's inconvenient. And the same is true when it comes to helping others, because there are two very different kinds of helping. One is driven by emotion. The other is guided by strategy. And if you don't understand the difference, you will spend your life exhausted, thinking you're making a difference while slowly losing yourself in the process. Emotional helping feels powerful in the moment. It feels urgent. It feels necessary. It feels right. Someone is struggling and you step in immediately. So someone is overwhelmed and you take their burden. Someone is falling apart and you try to hold them together. And in that moment, you feel useful, needed, important. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Just because something feels right in the moment doesn't mean it is right in the long run. Because emotional helping is reactive. It's driven by what you feel, not by what actually works. It doesn't ask, what is the best outcome here? It asks, how do I stop this discomfort right now? And that discomfort might not even belong to the other person. Sometimes it's yours. Sometimes you help because you can't tolerate seeing someone struggle. Sometimes you help because silence feels awkward. Sometimes you help because saying no makes you anxious. Sometimes you help because you've trained yourself to believe that your value comes from being useful. And so you jump in again and again and again. Not because it's always the right move, but because it relieves a feeling inside you. And that's where emotional helping becomes dangerous. Because it's not just about them anymore. It's about you. It becomes a cycle. They struggle. You feel uncomfortable. You help. You feel relief. And then it repeats. But here's what rarely happens in that cycle. Growth. Because growth requires friction. Growth requires challenge. Growth requires space for people to face their own reality, to confront their own habits, to build their own strength. And emotional helping removes that space. It removes the struggle before the lesson can be learned. It replaces responsibility with rescue. And over time, it creates a quiet dependency. Not always obvious, not always intentional, but very real. Because people adapt to the environment you create. If you are always there to fix things, they will stop trying to fix things themselves. If you are always there to catch them, they will take bigger risks without learning balance. If you are always there to carry the weight, they will forget how to build strength. And you might not notice it at first, because on the surface everything looks fine. They thank you, they appreciate you, they rely on you. But slowly, the dynamic shifts. They stop seeing you as someone who helps, and start seeing you as someone who is responsible. And responsibility without boundaries becomes pressure. Pressure becomes stress. Stress becomes exhaustion. And exhaustion becomes resentment. And now you're stuck, because you've created a role for yourself that you don't know how to step out of. If you continue, you burn out. If you stop, you feel guilty. And so you stay in the middle, drained, confused, and quietly frustrated. All because the helping started emotionally instead of intentionally. Now compare that to strategic helping. Strategic helping doesn't ignore emotion, but it doesn't follow it blindly either. It pauses, it observes, it asks better questions. Not, how do I fix this right now? But, what actually helps this person in the long term? And sometimes the answer is not immediate action. Sometimes the answer is patience. Sometimes the answer is guidance instead of intervention. Sometimes the answer is stepping back instead of stepping in. And that's not easy, because it requires self-mastery. It requires you to manage your own emotions before trying to manage someone else's situation. It requires you to sit with discomfort without rushing to eliminate it. It requires you to trust that growth is a process, not a moment. And most importantly, it requires you to detach your identity from being the rescuer. Because strategic helping is not about being the hero, it's about creating outcomes. And outcomes don't care about how good your intentions were. Outcomes respond to what actually works. So instead of asking, how can I help right now? Strategic helping asks, what does this person actually need to grow? What role should I play and what role should I not play? What happens if I don't step in immediately? Am I solving the problem or just delaying it? These are harder questions, but they lead to stronger results. Because sometimes the most powerful help you can give someone is not doing things for them. It's showing them they are capable of doing it themselves. It's giving them the space to struggle while knowing you're there if they truly need guidance. It's offering perspective instead of control. It's empowering instead of enabling. And this is where self-mastery becomes everything. Because if you haven't mastered yourself, your helping will always be influenced by your insecurities. If you need to feel needed, you will overhelp. If you fear rejection, you will overgive. If you avoid conflict, you will say yes when you should say no. And none of that is strategic. It's reactive. It's emotional. It's unsustainable. Self-mastery means you are aware of these tendencies and you choose differently. It means you recognize the urge to jump in and you pause. It means you feel the discomfort of saying no and you stay grounded. It means you understand that your role is not to fix everything, but to contribute in a way that creates real value. And that kind of helping looks very different. It's calmer, more intentional, less dramatic but more effective. Because it's not driven by urgency, it's driven by clarity. You don't rush to prove your value. You don't chase opportunities to be needed. You don't measure your worth by how much you give. You understand that your presence, your perspective, your example, those things matter more than constant action. And here's something most people don't realize. When you operate from self-mastery, you don't have to tell people who you are. They see it. They feel it. They experience it. And that changes how they interact with you. Because people don't just learn from what you do for them. They learn from what you model. If you constantly overextend yourself, you teach others to ignore their limits. If you constantly prioritize others at your own expense, you teach others to do the same. If you constantly rescue, you teach others to avoid responsibility. But if you show discipline, if you show boundaries, if you show intentional action, you teach something far more valuable. You teach strength. You teach ownership. You teach growth. And that's the real impact of strategic helping. It doesn't just solve problems. It changes behavior. It changes mindset. It creates independence. And independence is the ultimate form of empowerment. Because when someone no longer needs you to function, that's when you've truly helped them. But emotional helping struggles with that idea. Because emotional helping often wants to be needed. It wants to feel important. It wants to feel irreplaceable. And so, unconsciously, it maintains the cycle. It keeps people dependent just enough to stay relevant. Not intentionally, but naturally, because it's tied to identity. And breaking that requires honesty. It requires you to ask yourself, do I want to help or do I want to be needed? Am I adding value or am I creating reliance? Am I solving the root or just managing the surface? Because the difference between impact and exhaustion is not effort, it's direction. You can work incredibly hard helping people and still create no real change. You can give endlessly and still feel empty because effort without strategy leads to burnout. But when effort is aligned with intention, when helping is guided by clarity, when your actions are rooted in self-mastery, everything shifts. You become more effective with less energy. You create deeper change with fewer actions. You build stronger relationships without losing yourself in them. And most importantly, you stop feeling like helping is costing you everything. Because now it's not draining you. It's aligned with you. It's coming from a place of strength, not depletion. And that changes how you experience it. You don't feel overwhelmed. You don't feel resentful. You don't feel taken advantage of because you are no longer giving blindly. You are choosing consciously, and choice is powerful. Because when you choose to help, instead of feeling like you have to help, you take back control. You define your limits. You protect your energy. You decide where your effort goes and why. And that makes your help more valuable, not less, because it's intentional, it's focused, it's meaningful. And people feel that difference. They take it more seriously. They respect it more. They grow from it more because it's not constant, it's not automatic, it's earned and it's purposeful. And that's the shift from emotional helping to strategic helping, from reacting to leading, from seeking validation to practicing self-mastery. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not to help more people. The goal is to help people better, to create impact that lasts, to contribute in a way that builds, not just supports, to give in a way that strengthens others without weakening yourself. And that requires discipline. It requires awareness. It requires the willingness to step back when stepping in feels easier. It requires the courage to do less when doing more feels rewarding in the moment. Because real impact is not always visible immediately. It's built over time, through consistency, through intention, through choices that are not always comfortable, but always aligned. And when you reach that point, when your helping is no longer driven by emotion alone, when it's guided by clarity, supported by boundaries, and rooted in self-mastery, you become something different, not just someone who helps, but someone who creates change. And that kind of person doesn't burn out easily because they are not giving from emptiness. They are operating from alignment. They are grounded in who they are, not lost in what others need. And that's why self-mastery is louder than self-promotion. Because you don't have to convince anyone of your value. You don't have to prove how much you give. You don't have to show the world how helpful you are. Your results speak. Your presence speaks. Your consistency speaks. And the people who experience your help, they don't just feel supported, they become stronger, more capable, more independent. And that's the difference. That's the shift. That's where helping stops being exhausting and starts becoming transformative.